Welcome everyone to what will no doubt be an informative session today. The name of this session is Canada, a new competitive and regulated iGaming market. My name is Victor Biggio. I'm an online gaming consultant that's been involved primarily in the North American market for now 20 years, although it's frightening sometimes to say that. And so it's pretty exciting times here in Canada for sure, for those of us who've been in this market. I am joined today by three industry heavyweights who are going to help us tackle what's happening in the Canadian market and where we can see it going in the next few months. So I'd love to introduce our panelists, starting first with Dave Rowe. Dave is the Chief Operating Officer of Zuma and leads the innovation, strategy, delivery, and operations of their digital payment products. With over 18 years of experience, Dave has worked with the biggest names in payments, including Skrill, now owned by Paysafe. Neil Ehrlich is the Chief Corporate Development Officer at Nuvei, where he oversees strategic business development, as well as enhancing the company's overall growth in the US regulated gaming market. There are many accolades that have been bestowed upon Neil over the years, and most currently, he sits on the board of directors of the American Gaming Association, and no doubt will have insight into how what's happening in the States will lead into what's happening to Canada. And finally, Lilani is the head of marketing for BetRegal. He's been in the iGaming space for over 15 years. He was previously the marketing director at Pinnacle, and another Canadian who is excited, no doubt, to see what happens in the regulated space, having spent much time in what was a gray market leading into the events of the last few months. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. So we don't have a ton of time to get through what is no doubt a lot of topics. We're just going to jump right into it. Neil, I'm going to start with you. I know obviously your company has been involved in what's happening with regulations in the States and starting to work with regulators and so forth. For companies that are wanting to do business in Ontario or partner with an operator in Canada, what are some of the biggest challenges that they will face in the face of this new regulation?
Yeah, look, I think, and first, Victor, thanks for the intro and thanks for doing this today. And to SiGMA, thanks for having me be part of this. I think, look, the challenges are most of the groups that are coming in have had some experience working in regulated markets around the world. You know, if you look at who's going to be entering the market, most of the names you hear are not startups, are not people that are just, you know, entering the gaming space for the first time. And so I think most of them have experience working in regulated markets. In fact, I would bet that all of them have experience working in regulated markets. So it's using the experience that you've developed, you know, in different parts of the world. Europe, obviously, is kind of what everyone kind of points to. And then more recently in the last few years in the US. So when you look at the challenges, you know, I think that they're used to it. I don't know that there's necessarily a ton of challenges. I think anytime a market moves to a regulated environment, that's a good thing, right? So, you know, when people say challenges, we look at it a little bit differently. We look at this, you know, from a way of making sure that all the consumers are protected by working with regulated entities, that the merchants themselves have some oversight by a regulatory body. And so when you look at what they need to do, you know, having a presence, some sort of presence in Ontario, making sure they're set up, making sure they have the right, you know, responsible gaming controls in place. These are all things that to me are kind of standard, right? They should be standard. So when people look at it as a challenge, I actually don't. I think it's just another market that they're entering and should be pretty straightforward. So if someone does look at it as a challenge, it's probably because they haven't done it before, but it's nothing that will be overly complicated to the operators entering the space.
That's a very good point. It's not as though this is the first time many of them will be in the regulated space. Dave, thoughts on anything that Neil said, or any other challenges you might have come across in your experience?
I mean, I think there's probably a bit of a difference between a completely new entrant into the Canadian market versus that doesn't have any presence in Canada at all, compared to, say, a DFS operator that already has a customer base, because they're able to kind of upsell to that customer base. For a brand new entrant, of course, there's already existing operators that have been operating in the Ontario market for almost since the beginning of online gaming. So they have a considerable user base. They've been you know, tailoring the product, services, user experience for some time. So it'll be a case of trying to grab market share from those existing players, operators that have been operating in the gray market. So yeah, that'll be the only thing I would add to what Neil said. Totally agree.
Ali, jump in.
Yeah, well, sure. We'd love to chime in here on the operator side because I think Neil is absolutely right from a purely operational perspective, right? From in terms of getting set up and getting access to the market, that is relatively standard, and we've seen so many markets regulate over the last few years, European and US. But I think as an operator, there are certain challenges. There are, and again, challenges in a positive way, right? In a good way. I think as you mentioned, Victor, I've been in the online gaming space for 15 plus years. I've been a Canadian sports fan for 40 plus years. So I kind of bring a bit of a unique visibility into that, into our market. And I think that in Canada, what operators will find is that there is still somewhat of a parasitic connotation to online gambling companies. And a little bit of almost PR has to be done, and a little bit of education has to be done in the front to bring customers to the point where there is kind of an understanding and a more of a passionate response to what we're trying to do in the marketplace. I think as you walk down, the high street in London, you'll see Coral and Betfred and everybody else all around, and it's so ingrained in the culture. Here in Canada, we still have a system where we go to a gas station in Ontario specifically and fill out a little ticket and give it to an attendant, and it comes back to us. So we're really, naive kind of in the way we are exposed to online gaming. So there are some challenges, I think, in terms of the love for the online gaming community, I think, and not being seen as a parasite of the community, and also the educational aspect, I think, will be huge, and letting people understand how this all works, because this is relatively new to us, and technology is taking us a long way in the European and the US space, and I think Canada needs to have a bit of an education process to help catch up, and as operators, that's what we're focused on.
No, that's great and very well said. I do think it's interesting that this panel is called Canada, a new competitive and regulated iGaming market. The regulations are new. The competition is definitely not new. We like to consider it a 20-year overnight success up here. Ali, let's start with you on this because you're so close to the operator side. It's estimated that almost $1 billion a year is spent currently in Ontario alone in these unregulated gray market sites. What do you think is the fate for these sites? Are they going to have to get licensed? Will there be penalties? If they don't get licensed, will it just drive a bigger black market like there is in some of the European countries that have tried regulation? I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It is kind of one of the fundamental questions, right? Is how good is the regulated market if we're not really enforcing the regulation? So I think it depends on the penalty, to be completely honest with you. I'm of the opinion that as a market moves to regulation, that it should be more than just a slap on the wrist if you're continuing to operate in that market without the appropriate licensing. And that goes for existing customers as well, right? I know there are certain brands I've been a part of in the past that have significant databases in Canada already. As we enter this new stage of regulation, I think it's important we talked about, the PR side of this and the credibility side of this. I think it's important for us as an industry and the market as well to see that, we're taking this seriously, and those who are not adhering to the specific elements that we've laid out, we as Ontarians have laid out in terms of making this a fair, accessible, safe, competitive market. If those aren't being adhered to, then there has to be, in my opinion, significant penalties. So my hope is that it drives away the black market and the gray market. Now we are operating in a fully kind of regulated white market or regulated market where everything is very, very clear and very visible and very transparent. So my answer to that would be it depends on the penalty, but I think the hope is that it drives away that negative element.
Neil, from your perspective, do you see would you expect the Ontario government to, and then subsequent provincial governments, to try to enforce these regulations with severe punishments, or do you feel like it could end up being a little bit more gray than that?
No, look, I'm not going to speculate on what the government might do by way of enforcement. But what I would say is I think this is actually a great opportunity for the customer, because for the first time, like you said, there's been online gaming in Canada for many, many years, which people have operated in this gray market. Now Ontario is going to move to this regulated environment, and there will be a list of approved vendors, approved operators in the province that will be able to legally offer their services to customers in Ontario. So if I'm a customer in Ontario for the first time, really, I'll be able to go just like I can do in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or Michigan or any of the states that have opened up in the US, and you can see exactly who is licensed. So it'll be very clear cut as to which operators are actually operating legally in Ontario. So as a customer, I feel a lot better knowing that I'm working with a licensed entity from a consumer protection standpoint, just from some oversight standpoint. So I actually think this is obviously a great thing moving towards a regulated environment. You know, groups like Nuvei will only work with customers or merchants and operators in Ontario if they are regulated and licensed. So, you know, I think that also goes one step further, is knowing who you're working with, having full transparency, being, you know, regulated by the government in Ontario. I think is overall a really good thing. And I think it'll be great for customers to know that when they are now going to place a bet and make a wager online, that they're doing so with a regulated entity and they can clearly see who those entities are.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting to hear Nuvei's position on working with only companies that are licensed. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that from the vendor side too. Dave, I want to switch gears a little bit and get into the payment side of it. It's good to have two people on here with that kind of level of experience that you guys have. You know, one of the things in this market, certainly in the gray area of the market, that shifted the balance of power was when Interac finally was able to be used by a lot of these gray market operators. Obviously, with licensing and regulation, what's going to happen and whether or not those companies will still be able to use Interac and some of the other methods, it's hard to say. I'd love to get your take on you know, where you and other payment companies really feel the benefits are for licensing in Ontario and in other provinces.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from a payment provider perspective, it creates competition, which brings more operators into the market. I mean, I think we've already seen this in Canada with a large number of operators entering the market in the last 12 months in anticipation for the incoming regulations. And you know, the licensing itself, similar to what Neil was just saying, you know, creates this trust factor. You know, the operators having a physical presence in the province, in country, and you know, having to comply with the right regulations, the whole consumer protection piece, responsible gaming practices, everything else. So I think that you know, there's going to be a significant amount of continuity in terms of what payment methods are going to be used post regulation. May still be a bit of a challenge with the banks and acquiring, but I think Neil can maybe talk better to that. Yeah, I think it's definitely a positive step from a payment processing perspective.
Ali, what are your thoughts from the? Oh, sorry, Neil, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, because and it'll be related to a good segue into what I was going to say for Ali. But look, at the end of the day, what's most important? Groups like Ali and his company and all the competitors that are going to be entering the Ontario market are going to be spending a ton of money marketing and trying to acquire customers, right? And so the worst thing that can happen is they're out there with the best marketing campaigns in the world, attracting, you know, thousands of people to their site on a daily basis, and that customer can't make a deposit. It's literally the worst thing that can happen. And so for us, we look at it in the sense of taking 20 plus years of experience working in regulated markets and understanding that the most important thing is to offer the customer and the operator the highest level of success for a customer to come and make a deposit in a safe environment, and giving them the optionality on how they want to make that deposit. So if a customer wants to use a credit card, it's working with the card brands and the issuing banks to ensure the highest possible approval rates. You know, the US obviously had a ton of problems, still do on the credit side, for card acceptance. They introduced a few new MCC codes several years ago, merchant category codes, to try and improve the acceptance rates. Canada doesn't have some of those same merchant category codes, so other forms of payment become more important at times, right? So what will the approval look like now that Ontario is regulating? It's different than the European operators that are coming in and offering their service today in a gray market. Will the acceptance rates go up and down? These are things that remain to be seen. Then what are the alternatives you want to give? You mentioned Interac. For those that people, you know, are listening that don't know, is really our kind of debit rails here in Canada. So offering, and there's multiple forms of that. So there's like, the Interact e-transfers, which is essentially, sending money via email. There's EFT, which is the Canadian version of ACH, people paying from their bank account. So when we look at this regulated environment, ultimately it's helping operators like Ali. It's helping operators that are coming to the market ensure that when a customer comes to their website, they have a way to deposit no matter what form of payment they want to use. It could be credit, it could be debit, it could be Interact, it could be cash, however they want to make a deposit, making sure that we enable them so that when they're spending these millions of dollars attracting new customers, it doesn't fall flat on their face because the customer can't access their funds. I would also go one step further. Getting their money out is just as important. So having multiple forms of payments on the way out, back to their bank account instantly, back to their credit or debit card instantly. So working with the card brands, working with the banks to do so. And of course, I always go back into, a safe and secure environment and working with a group that has experience doing it and knows what they're doing. So yeah, I think people often overlook, the payment side of things because it's not, it's maybe one of the more boring topics when we talk about this exciting, gaming space, but it's certainly what, we look at it as kind of the lifeblood of the industry.
Well, the exciting part of it is only exciting if people have money in their accounts.
Right.
And so I think, it is the engine that needs to run smoothly in order for us to get all excited about it. Along with regulation, obviously, we're the discussion creeps in about responsible gaming and what that looks like in a regulated environment. Hopefully that's a big selling point of regulation in most markets. But there's been some discussion and argument about in the European markets about who should manage those exclusion lists. Should it be operator based or should it be regulator based? Ali, I ask you from the operator side, which do you would prefer and which do you think it might end up being?
I mean, it has to be operators for sure, in my opinion. And I also think that even as we say responsible gaming now, it seems really pigeonholed into this idea of somebody who has a problem with gambling, right? There's addiction issues, whatever it is. And I think responsible gaming now takes such a wider scope of umbrella, a wider umbrella for us now. So, I mean, the short answer is the operators, in my opinion. And I think that, it comes part and parcel with just doing good at home kind of thing for us in terms of being Canadians as well and wanting to expose the proper sides of online gambling to our market. I think if operators have to wait for regulators to come in and tell them what to do and not do, I think that's kind of a indicator of a larger problem. With things in the UK like implementing whistle to whistle advertising TV bans. So we're going to start doing that stuff a little more proactively, I think, because we talked a bit before about the parasitic connotation. We really want people to know and the customers to know that, along with sponsoring the CFL, because we're huge CFL fans, we're really invested in kind of the social responsibility, not just responsible gaming as it applies to addiction and everything else within gambling. But our first initiative with the CFL, for instance, is fully focused. It doesn't even talk about betting. It's fully focused on a community MVP concept in the 9 CFL market. So, I mean, I think in the past you would pay attention to responsible gambling, and then it became part of your marketing strategy. And I think now it's more part of our kind of corporate identity, is making sure that we have a certain amount of allocation to allocation of our focus and budget and resources on not just responsible gaming in its traditional sense, but also just doing good in our backyard. And this is where we all, but myself and Mike, who's my boss and the CEO, we kind of both grew up playing Pee Wee hockey and baseball here. So this is a little bit more personal to us. So I think overall operators take responsibility for sure, but especially in a market like Canada, we're of the opinion that operators should take the lead on that before regulators tell us what to do.
Dave, I suppose to piggyback off that, I assume that the payments world will want to be a helpful part of ensuring responsible gaming across the board. Do you have any thoughts on how you might get involved on either side to assist operators and or the AGCO in this?
I mean, we've been quite involved with the AGCO from the beginning in terms of defining how payments should work, payment providers should operate within Ontario. And part of that was sharing best practices that we've experienced, and also some things that haven't worked so well, so that they don't go down the wrong track. And I think that that also bears into responsible gaming as well. I mean, at the end of the day, having exclusion lists is really almost too late, right, for a lot of people, and all of the things that have been developed over the years to these measures like deposit limits and timeouts and time limits and self-help tools and things like that. They're already in place with most of the operators operating in Canada today, and we expect that will probably continue. So we are there to help and be on hand, but the slight challenge from the payment provider perspective is that we don't see the full picture. We see obviously the money going in, the money going out, but we don't see what's happening on the other side of the fence. So there's only so far that we can kind of go. Yeah, I agree with Ali in terms of the actual, whether it sits on the regulator side or the operator. I think from an ideal world perspective, if someone has a problem and is excluded from one site, then it doesn't really help them if they can go somewhere else. But operationally, it's one of those things that's just too difficult to implement and is really unrealistic. So
no, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, look, I knew this was going to happen really quickly, and I know there's a lot of people who are watching this. They'll be asking us or wondering why we aren't speculating more on what this will look like or what business model the AGCO will implement. And again, I feel like we could answer questions now that may not be relevant in a few weeks' time. So as we wrap this up, I will ask just very quickly from each, how do you see your best guess on when you think that you will have a full set of regulations in Ontario, and then following that, what does this look like for consumers in other provinces? Do you think it'll be a quick turnaround for the provinces to jump in? Based on any of your experience, will they write their own regulations or just cut and paste what they're seeing in Ontario? Neil, let's start with you since you're the one with the most experience on the US side of the border.
Yeah, I think my take will be, and purely speculating, which I hate to do, but if you do look at what happened in the U.S., right, you had the first movers, right, in the early days with New Jersey, Nevada, Delaware, and they kind of operated a little bit, differently in terms of how they regulated, what kind of games were, whether it was, obviously sports wasn't available when they launched online gaming, but and then you saw all the other states already come on board and continue to see that, and you will continue to see even more in the very near future. So I think the other provinces are certainly watching what Ontario is doing very closely, and we'll see how things go. And my guess is, if it goes well, which a lot of people think it will, then they may follow suit. But it's interesting, they've all, the provinces traditionally have had very different opinions on, some of the existing operators in the space already and how they operate. They look at it differently. Some, were contemplating partnering with some of the gray market operators for a while. Others were looking to try to ban them outright. And so it's interesting to see the different views from the different provinces. And don't forget, from these provinces today, in their minds, the government itself are the only regulated entities that are operating in Canada today. So this is a big shift, right, in the dynamic of the landscape in Canada. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think, look, good for Ontario. I think this is going to be good for the customers in Ontario, to be honest, which ultimately to me is the most important thing. What's best for the consumer? How do we protect the consumer as much as possible? And I think that moving to a regulated environment certainly does that. So be interesting to see what happens in the very near future.
No kidding. Dave, final thoughts on from your end on what you see future-wise in the provinces?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Neil, I think he covered most points there. I mean, we really expect that the other provinces will follow suit in some way, shape, or form, and they'll probably have their own slant on things, maybe being more protective of what they've got on the provincial state side. But yeah, at the same time, I think there's going to be similarities in terms of their, focus on the consumer and how do they benefit from it economically, and the whole kind of stakeholder integrity piece. So yeah, I think they are going to follow suit, and I think we hope from an industry perspective as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Ali, final word to you from the operator side. I'd put you on the spot and say, which province do you think is going to be next after Ontario? but I know you're a betting man and I don't want to lose any more money to you. So we just thoughts from the operator side on how hopeful you are that it will be perhaps faster than longer.
Sure, yeah, and similar to Neil, speculation is always a dangerous game to play. But in terms of timelines, I think, based on some of the roadmaps that we've seen so far, I think realistically, we're hoping to have, if everything goes well, applications maybe in place to begin around Q4 of this year. And I mean, I'd love to be sitting in a place where we could actually take wagers around Super Bowl. I think that's very ambitious. But I mean, that is a reasonable milestone to look at, Q1, Q2 of next year. In terms of the other provinces, I echo what the guy said, right? I mean, I think there will be some kind of baseline underlying commonality, but I am very intrigued by some of the disparities that have creeped up over the last little bit, especially over with the provinces out west and their takes on the competitive influences of the typical gray market operators. I will just echo again Neil's comment on the customer and the consumer specifically, and I'll speak to myself being this prototypical Ontario Canadian sports fan, and I think I'm the one that's going to win in this, right? As a consumer, I'm going to get a competitive landscape of operators who have been vetted, who have achieved a certain level of criteria to operate in this space, and I think as we look at the Canadian landscape, we take a cross section of 10 Canadian customers. 1 or 2 of them are probably betting online somewhere already, maybe Betway, Sports Interaction, whatever it is. I think 3 through 6 or 7 who may be playing Proline, or maybe playing office pools, or maybe some fantasy with their buddies, are the ones that are going to really benefit from this whole process, because they'll get hopefully the education they need and the understanding they need of how the entire process works, and it should really enhance the fan experience overall. So yeah, again, I think the consumer is who's going to win primarily, and hopefully the other provinces see that and kind of take all the good stuff and implement those in terms of their regulation.
Well, that's great. Look, there's still a lot of moving parts and obviously multiple provinces to worry about here. But for those of us who've been in the market for as long as we have, including the people on this panel, we're thrilled to see that things are moving finally, and that we are headed to a regulated market where we can have a proper competitive landscape. And most importantly, the consumers can feel the safest possible when they decide to spend their hard-earned money online at whatever site they choose. So I'm sure lots will change between now and then. Who knows, we might all be back to talk about this in Q4, you never know. But in the meantime, Neil, Dave, Ali, thank you so much for joining me on this panel today. I hope it's informative for everybody who's watching at home, and we look forward to what will be an exciting rest of 2021.